for following me 4 hours ago. It's nighttime. This is a super secret, sleepy, slumberous stream because I took a nap earlier, so I'm not tired now. Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal for preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being a burthen to their parents or country, and for making them beneficial to the public. It is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country, when they see the streets, the roads, and cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3, 4, or 6 children, all in rags and importuning every passenger for an alms. These mothers, instead of being able to work for their honest livelihood, are forced to employ all their time in strolling to beg sustenance for their helpless infants, who, as they grow up, either turn thieves for want of work, or leave their dear native country to fight for the Pretender in Spain, or sell themselves to the Barbados. I think it is agreed by all parties that this prodigious number of children in the arms, or on the backs, or at the heels of their mothers, and frequently of their fathers, is in the present deplorable state of the kingdom a very great additional grievance, and therefore whoever could find out a fair, cheap, and easy method of making these children sound, useful members of the commonwealth, would deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for a preserver of the nation. But my intention is very far from being confined to provide only for the children of professed beggars. It is of a much greater extent, and shall take in the whole number of infants at a certain age who are born of parents in effect as little able to support them as those who demand our charity in the streets. As to my own part, having turned my thoughts for many years upon this important subject, and maturely weighed the several schemes of our projectors, I have always found them grossly mistaken in their computation. It is true, a child just dropped from its dam may be supported by her milk for a solar year, with little other nourishment, at most not above the value of twos, when my mother may with the mother may certainly get, or the value in scraps, by her lawful occupation of begging, and it is exactly at 1 year old that I propose to provide for them in such a manner as, instead of being a charge upon their parents or the parish, or wanting food and raiment for the rest of their lives, they shall be the contrary contribute to the feeding, and partly to the clothing, of many thousands. There is likewise another great advantage in my scheme, that it will prevent those voluntary abortions, and that horrid practice of women murdering their bastard children, alas, too frequent among us, sacrificing the poor innocent babes, I doubt, more to avoid the expense than the shame, which would move tears and pity in the most savage and inhuman breast. The number of souls in this kingdom being usually reckoned 1,500,000, of these I calculate there may be about 200,000 couple whose wives are breeders, from which number I subtract 30,000 couple who are able to maintain their own children, although I apprehend there cannot be so many under the present distresses of the kingdom. But this being granted, there will remain 170,000 breeders. I again subtract 50,000 for those women who miscarry, whose children die by accident or disease within the year. Shh, night slimy ducks, night stream. And this one's real funny. It's about eating children. There are only 120,000 children of poor parents annually born. The question, therefore, is how this number shall be reared and provided for, which, as I have already said, under the present situation of affairs, is utterly impossible by all the methods hitherto proposed, for we can neither employ them in handicraft or agriculture, we neither build houses, I mean in the country, nor cultivate land. They can very seldom pick up a livelihood by stealing till they arrive at 6 years old, except where they are of cowardly parts, although I confess they learn the rudiments much earlier, during which time they can, however, be properly looked upon only as probationers, as I had been informed by a principal gentleman in the country of Cavan, who protested to me that he never knew above 1 or 2 instances under the age of 6, even in a part of the kingdom so renowned for the quickest proficiency at that art. I am assured by our merchants that a boy or a girl between 12 years old is no saleable commodity, and even when they come to this age they will not yield between 3L, some sort of symbols, 3L or 3L, 2S, 6D, some sort of money, at the most on the exchange. Pounds, I suppose, £3 or £3, 2 silver. I don't know what 6D would be. Dank, Deutsch, Deutschmarks, at most on the exchange, which cannot turn to account either to the parents or kingdom, the charge of nutriment and rags having been at least 4 times that value. I shall now humbly propose my own thoughts, which I hope shall not be liable to the least objection. I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young healthy child, well nursed, is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled, and I make no doubt that it will equally serve in a fracaise or a ragout. I do therefore humbly offer it to public consideration that of the 120,000 children already computed, 20,000 may be reserved for breed, whereof only 1/4 part to be males, which is more than we allow to sheep, black cattle, or swine. Yummy indeed. I like that it was an American that suggested that to him. And my reason that knew. Somehow this American knew. I mean, somehow. This American really was familiar with the taste of children. Anyway, my reason is that these children are seldom the fruits of marriage, a circumstance not much regarded by our savages. Therefore, one male will be sufficient to serve 4 females, that the remaining 100,000 may at a year old be offered in sale to the persons of quality and fortune throughout the kingdom, always advising the mother to let them suck plentifully in the last months, so as to render them plump and fat for a good table. Human child is veal like. I don't know about that one, slimy ducks. I mean, maybe. A child will make 2 dishes at an entertainment for friends, and when the family dines alone, the fore or hind quarters will make a reasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt, will be very good broiled on the 4th day, especially in winter. I reckoned upon a medium that a child just born will weigh 12 pounds, and in a solar year, if tolerably nursed, will increase to 28 pounds. I grant this food will be somewhat dear, and therefore very proper for landlords, who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the children. Infant's flesh will be in season throughout the year, more plentifully in March, and a little before and after, for we are told by a grave author, an eminent French physician, that fish being a prolific diet, there are more children born in Roman Catholic countries about 9 months after Lent than at any other season. Therefore, reckoning a year after Lent, the markets will be more glutted than usual, because the number of popish infants is at least 3 to 1 in this kingdom, and therefore it will have one other collateral advantage by lessening the number of papists among us. I have already computed the charge of nursing a beggar's child, in which list I reckon all cottagers, labourers, and 4/5 of the farmer will be about 2 sound silver swifts, who knows, per annum, rags included. I believe no gentleman would give rapine to 10 for the carcass of a good fat child, which, as I have said, will make 4 dishes of excellent nutritive meat, when he has only some particular friend or his own family to dine with him. Thus the squire will learn to be a good landlord, and grow popular among his tenants. The mother will have 8 silver net profit, and be fit for work till she produces another child. Those who are most thrifty, as I must confess the times require, may flay the carcasses, the skin of which, artificially dressed, will make admirable gloves for ladies, and summer boots for fine gentlemen. As to our city of Dublin, shambles may be appointed for this purpose. Oh, shilling. That's probably what the S stands for. Shillings. Shambles may be appointed the purpose in most convenient parts of it, and butchers, we may be assured, will not be wanting, although I rather recommend buying the children alive, and dressing them hot from the knife, as we do roasting pigs. A very worthy person, a true lover of his country, and whose virtues I highly esteem, was lately pleased in discoursing on this matter to offer a refinement upon my scheme. He said that many gentlemen of this kingdom, having of late destroyed their deer, he conceived that the want of venison might be well supplied by the bodies of young lads and maidens not exceeding 14 years of age, nor under 12, so great a number of both sexes in every country being now ready to starve for want of work and service, and these to be disposed of by their parents if alive, or otherwise by their nearest relations. But with due deference to so excellent a friend, and so deserving a patriot, I cannot be altogether in his sentiments, for as to the males, my American acquaintance assured me, from frequent experience, that their flesh was generally tough and lean, like that of our schoolboys, by continual exercise, and their taste disagreeable, and to fatten them would not answer the charge. Then as to the females, it would, I think, with humble submission, be a loss to the public, because they soon become breeders themselves, and besides, it is not improbable that some scrupulous people might be apt to censure such a practice, although indeed very unjustly, as a little bordering upon cruelty, which I confess has always been with me the strongest objection against any project, how well soever intended. Really profound stuff, says Slimy Ducks. I can think of no argument against eating orphans. I think that says more about you than it does about the book. But in order to justify my friend, he confessed that this expedient was put into his head by the famous Salmazar, a native of the island Formosa, who came from thence to London above 20 years ago, and in conversation told my friend that in his country, when any young person happened to be put to death, the executioner sold the carcass to persons of quality as a prime dainty, and that in his time the body of a plump girl of 15, who was crucified for an attempt to poison the emperor, was sold to his imperial majesty's prime minister of state, and other great mandarins of the court, in joint from the gibbet at 400 crown. Neither indeed can I deny that if the same use were made of several plump young girls in this town, who without one single groat to their fortunes cannot stir abroad without a chair, and appear to play house and assemblies in foreign fineries, which they never will pay for, kingdom would not be the worse. Some persons of a desponding spirit are in great concern about that vast number of poor people who are aged, diseased, or maimed, and I have been desired to employ my thoughts what course may be taken to ease the nation so grievous an encumbrance. But I am not in the least pain upon that matter, because it is very well known that they are every day dying and rotting by cold and famine, filth and vermin, as fast as can be reasonably expected. And as to the young laborers, they are now in almost as hopeful a condition. They cannot get work, and consequently pine away for want of nourishment, to a degree that if at any time they are accidentally hired to common labor, they have not strength to perform it, and thus the country and themselves are happily delivered from the evils to come. I have too long digressed, and therefore shall return to my subject. I think the advantages by the proposal which I have made are obvious and many, as well as of the highest importance. For first, as I have already observed, it would greatly lessen the number of papists with whom we are yearly overrun, being the principal breeders of the nation as well as our most dangerous enemies, and who stay at home on purpose to deliver the kingdom to the Pretender, hoping to take their advantage by the absence of so many good Protestants, who have chosen rather to leave their country than stay at home and pay tithes against their conscience to an episcopal curate, episcopal rather. Secondly, the poorest tenants will have something valuable of their own, which by law may be made liable to distress, and help to pay their landlord's rent, their corn and cattle being already seized, and money a thing unknown. Thirdly, whereas the maintenance of 100,000 children from 2 years old and upward cannot be computed at less than 10, what did I say it was, shillings apiece per annum, the nation's stock will thereby increase 50,000 pounds per annum, besides the profit of a new dish introduced to the tables of all gentlemen of fortune in the kingdom who have any refinement in taste. And the money will circulate among ourselves, the goods being entirely of our own growth and manufacture. Fourthly, the constant breeders, beside the gain of 8 shillings sterling per annum by the sale of their children, will get rid of the charge of maintaining them after the first year. Fifthly, this food would likewise bring great custom to taverns, where the vintners would certainly be so prudent as to procure the best receipts for dressing it to perfection, and consequently have their houses frequented by all the fine gentlemen who justly value themselves upon their knowledge in good eating, and a skilful cook who understands how to oblige his guests will contrive to make it as expensive as they please. Sixthly, it would be a great inducement to marriage, which all wise nations have either encouraged by rewards or enforced by laws and penalties. It would increase the care and tenderness of mothers towards their children when they were sure of a settlement for life to the poor babes provided in some sort by the public for their annual profit or expense. We should see an honest emulation among the married women, which of them could bring the fattest child to the market. Men would become as fond of their wives during the time of their pregnancy as they are now of their mares and fowl, their cows and calf, their sows when they are ready to farrow, nor offer to beat or kick them, as it is too frequent a practice, for fear of a miscarriage. Tommy Duck says, I would think the option to sell your children would be a very powerful parenting tool. If your kid acts out of line, just sell it. I mean, parents already use that kind of threat against their kids if it's actually genuine. Kids would definitely get. Yeah. I don't know, though. Poor kids might just. I guess if they're selling them, but like at a year old, the kids are never going to revolt. Like they're not going to stand up against this kind of thing. They don't have time to learn how to. So they would just die. Many other advantages. You would need other people to. You would need like adults to fight against. Whatever. I think the author said it could be sold up to 14. Thought that was the suggestion that the American made, and he disagreed with it. It doesn't matter. It's all just a joke, anyways. Many other advantages might be enumerated. For instance, the addition of some thousand carcasses in our exportant of barreled beef, the propagation of swine's flesh, and improvement in the art of making good bacon, so much wanted among us by the great destruction of pigs, too frequent at our table, which are no way comparable in taste or magnificence to a well grown fat yearling child, which roasted whole will make a considerable figure at a Lord Mayor's feast or any other public entertainment. But this and many others I omit, being studious of brevity. Supposing that 1,000 families in this city would be constant customers for instance infants' flesh, besides others who might have it at merry makings, particularly at weddings and christenings, I compute that Dublin would take off annually about 200 or 20,000 carcasses, and the rest of the kingdom, where probably they would be sold somewhat cheaper, the remaining 80,000. I can think of no objection that will possibly be raised against this proposal, unless it should be urged that the number of people will be thereby much lessened in the kingdom. This I freely own, and it was indeed one principal design in offering it to the world. I desire the reader will observe that I calculate my remedy for this one individual kingdom of Ireland, and for no other than that ever was, is, or I think ever can be upon the earth. Therefore let no man talk to me of other expedients, of taxing our absentees at 5 shilling a pound, of using neither clothes nor household furniture, except what is of our own growth and manufacture, of utterly rejecting the materials and instruments that promote foreign luxury, of curing the expensiveness of pride, vanity, idleness, and gaming in our women, and introducing a vein of parsimony, prudence, and temperance, of learning to love our country, in the want of which we differ even from Laplanders and the inhabitants of Tobnambu, Topi Nambu, of quitting our animosities and factions, nor acting any longer like the Jews who were murdering one another at the very moment their city was taken. Of is that Josephinus? Of being a little cautious not to sell our country and conscience for nothing, of teaching landlords to have at least one degree of mercy towards their tenants, lastly, of putting a spirit of honesty, industry, and skill into our shopkeepers, who, if a resolution could now be taken to buy only our negative goods, would immediately unite to cheat and exact upon us in the price, the measure, and the goodness, nor could ever be brought to make one fair proposal of just dealing, though often and earnestly invited to it. Therefore, I repeat, let no man talk to me of these and the like expedients till he has at least some glimpse of hope that there will be ever some hearty and sincere attempt to put them in practice. But as to myself, having been wearied out for many years with offering vain, idle, visionary thoughts, and at length utterly despairing of success, I fortunately fell upon this proposal, which, as it is wholly new, so it has something solid and real, of no expense and little trouble, full in our own power, and whereby we can incur no danger of disobligating England, for this kind of commodity will not bear exportation, the flesh being of too tender con- constance to admit a long continuance of in salt, although perhaps I could name a country which would be glad to eat up our whole nation without it. After all, I am not so violently bent upon my own opinion as to reject any offer proposed by wise men which shall be found equally innocent, cheap, easy, and effectual. But before something of that kind shall be advanced in contradiction to my scheme, and offering a better, I desire the author or authors will be pleased maturely to consider 2 points. First, as things now stand, how will how they will be able to find food and raiment for 100,000 useless mouths and backs, and secondly, there being a round million of creatures in human figure throughout this kingdom, whose whole subsistence put into a common stock would leave them in debt £2,000,000 sterling, adding those who are beggars by profession to the bulk of farmers, cottagers, and laborers, with the wives and children who are beggars in effect. I desire those politicians who dislike my overture, and perhaps be so bold as to attempt an answer, that they will first ask the parents of these mortals whether they would not at this day think it a great happiness to have been sold for food at a year old in the manner I prescribe, and thereby have avoided such a perpetual scene of misfortunes as they have since gone through by the oppression of landlords, the impossibility of paying rent without money or trade, the want of common sustenance, with neither house nor clothes to cover them from the inclemence of the weather, and the most inevitable prospect of entailing the like or greater miseries upon their breed for ever. I profess in the sincerity of my heart that I have not the least personal interest in endeavoring to promote this necessary work, having no other motive than the public good of my country, by advancing our trade, providing for infants, relieving the poor, and giving some pleasure to the rich. I have no children by which I can propose to get a single penny, the youngest being 9 years old, and my wife past childbearing. Pretty good idea. I mean, can't really argue that. Anyone who tries, stupid, stupid and dumb. Um, was this written during the Industrial Revolution or similar agricultural change? Seems to think there are a lot of useless people. It was written in 1729, so yes. It's also completely satirical. He doesn't really think any of these things. He's making fun of people by saying, "You care so little about people that you would just go ahead and eat them. This proposal doesn't even seem weird." It's Jonathan Swift, king of satire. Um, there are definitely. Yeah, this one's only a page. A meditation upon a broomstick. This is so short. I'll read this note here. I don't think. Is eating people the most horrific thing? I feel like we make up a lot of monsters centered around that concept. Uh, yeah, it's pretty like comes pretty naturally fearing it. It comes pretty naturally. I mean, predators are predators are a scary thing, and being hunted by a human being is scarier than being hunted by an animal. Usually, people eating people. It also just comes across as very unnatural and just naturally disturbing. Sort of like there's just like a taboo built into us about it. Um, I don't know why. I mean, I obviously know why because I feel it too. But eating in particular, I mean, I guess it's just such a core part of existence. Useless statement. That was just such a flaw. Yeah. I don't know why it's so. I guess this the concept of eating in general is sort of a very violent thing. Sieging a castle is normal, but impaling and drinking their blood is seen as odd. Yeah, it is kind of hypocritical, but it does get you sick. So, I mean, not supposed to do it. Like killing a castle, that doesn't get you sick. That gets you money. That gets you land. That's only beneficial. That is reinforced within human nature to do that. But yeah, you don't want to drink blood out of them. Yeah, they're probably just really old feelings. This one's only a page. I don't know what this means, but a meditation upon a broomstick. Out here. I have a human head in my fridge. What should I do with it? Uh, remember that scene in American Psycho when he has a human head in his fridge? But he grabs some sorbet next to it. Guess you should eat some sorbet. Meditation upon a broomstick. There's a note. When visiting London in the first decade of the 18th century, Swift sometimes acted as family chaplain, the family of the Earl of Berkeley. He was often asked by Lady Berkeley to read aloud from various books of devotion and meditations, a task he did not enjoy. In order to avoid this task in future, Swift wrote and inserted his own meditations into the family copy of Robert Boyle's Meditations, and read it aloud the next time he was called upon to assist with her ladyship's devotions. Swift carried off the joke with a straight face, and Lady Berkeley learned of the trick only after praising A Meditation upon a Broomstick friends. They, of course, had never heard of the essay, and when they opened the volume to examine it, they found Swift's handwritten exercise. Okay, so this was literally just trolling his employer. This is just one page here, so a meditation upon a broomstick, according to the style and manners of the Honorable Robert Boyle's Meditations. This single stick which you now behold ingloriously lying in that neglected corner, I once knew in a flourishing state in a forest. It was full of sap, full of leaves, and full of boughs, but now in vain does the busy art of man pretend to vie with nature. By tying that withered bundle of twigs to its sapless trunk, it is now at best but the reverse of what it was, a tree turned upside down, the branches on the earth, and the root in the air. It is now handled by every dirty wench, condemned to do her drudgery, and by a capricious kind of fate is destined to make other things clean, and be nasty itself. At length worn to the stumps in the service of the maids, it is either thrown out of doors or condemned to the last use of a kindling a fire. When I beheld this I sighed and said within myself, surely man is a broomstick. Nature sent him into the world strong and lusty, and in thriving condition, wearing his own hair on his head, the proper branches of this reasoning vegetable, until the axe of interminence has loped off his green boughs and left him a withered trunk. He then flies to art and puts on a periwig, valuing himself upon an unnatural bundle of hairs, all covered with powder, that never grew on his head. But now should this our broomstick pretend to enter the scene, proud of those birchen spoils it never bore, and all covered with dust, though the sweepings of the finest lady's chamber, we should be apt to ridicule and despise its vanity, partial judges that we are of our own excellences and other men's defaults. But a broomstick, perhaps you will say, is an emblem of a tree standing on its head. And pray what is man but a topsy-turvy creature, his animal faculties perpetually mounted on his rational, his head where his heels should be, grovelling on the earth, and yet with all his faults he sets up to be a universal reformer and corrector of abuses, a remover of grievances, rakes into every slut's corner of nature, bringing hidden corruption to the light, and raises a mighty dust where there was none before, sharing deeply all the while in the same pollutions he pretends to sweep away. His last days are spent in slavery to women, and generally the least deserving, till worn out to the stumps, like his brother Besom, he is kicked out of doors, or made use of to kindle flames for others to warm themselves by. That might be funnier if I'd read any of Boyle's other meditations. Uh, Something like meditations like that seems like it used to be. I don't really know. I know there's an episode of King of the Hill where Peggy has sort of a meditations column in the paper. Or it isn't her, it's somebody else. They have like Wisdom. Just thinking about things. Just had to put little, yeah, little like I don't know, just shower thoughts. Big sip. Yeah, that was a big sip. um, Argument against abolishing Christianity in England. An argument to provide. An argument to prove that the abolishing of Christianity in England may, as things now stand, be attended with some inconveniences, and perhaps not produce those many good effects proposed thereby. I am very sensible what a weakness and presumption it is to reason against the general humour and disposition of the world. I remember it was with great justice and due regard to the freedom both of the public and the press, forbidden upon several penalties to write or discourse or lay wagers against the Union, even before it was confirmed by Parliament, because that was looked upon as a design to oppose the current of the people, which, beside the folly of it, is a manifest of breach of the fundamental law, and makes this majority of opinion the voice of God. In like manner, for the very same reasons, it may perhaps be neither safe nor prudent to argue against the abolishing of Christianity at a juncture when all parties appear so unanimously determined upon the point. Learning to sew a button part 2 stream win soon. I failed so miserably I became discouraged a bit, but I can't put it off forever. I'll have to sew that button successfully. Uh, I have to do that soon. I really do. However, I do not know, I know not how, whether from the affection of singularity or the perverseness of human nature, but so it unhappily falls out that I cannot be entirely of this opinion. Nay, though I were sure an order were issued for my immediate prosecution by the Attorney General, I should still confess that, in the present posture of our affairs at home or abroad, I do not yet see the absolute necessity of extirpating the Christian religion from among us. This perhaps may appear too great a paradox even for our wise and paradoxical age to endure. Therefore I shall handle it with all tenderness, and with the utmost deference to that great and profound majority which is of another sentiment. And yet the curious may please to observe how much the genius of a nation is liable to alter in half an age. I have heard it affirmed for certain by some very old people that the contrary opinion was, even in their memories, as much in vogue as the other is now, and that a project for the abolishing of Christianity would then have appeared as singular, and been thought as absurd, as it would be at this time to write or discourse in its defense. This one really could just be written now. You change the language, and this one is absolutely uh, still just as relevant. Therefore, I freely own that all appearances are against me. The system of the gospel, after the fate of other systems, is generally antiquated and exploded, and the mass or body of the common people, among whom it seems to have had its latest credit, are now grown as much ashamed of it as their betters. opinions like fashions always descending from those of quality to the middle sort, and thence to the vulgar, where at length they are dropped and vanish. But here I would not be mistaken, and must therefore be so bold as to borrow a distinction from the writers on the other side, when they make a difference between nominal and real Trinitarians. I hope no reader imagines me so weak to stand up in the defense of real Christianity, such as used in primitive times, if we may believe the authors of those ages, to have been influenced upon men's belief and actions, to offer at the restoring of what would indeed be a wild project. It would be to dig up foundations, to destroy at one blow all the wit and half the learning of the kingdom, to break the entire frame and constitution of things, to ruin trade, extinguish arts and sciences, and to with the professors of them, in short, to turn our courts, exchanges, and shops into deserts, and would be as absurd as the proposal of Horace, where he advises the Romans all in a body to leave their city and seek a new seat in some remote part of the world, by way of cure for the corruption of their manners. Therefore I think this caution was in itself altogether unnecessary, which I have inserted only to prevent all possibility of cavilling, since every candid reader will easily understand my discourse to be intended only in defense of nominal Christianity, the other having been for some time wholly laid aside by general consent, as utterly inconsistent with our present schemes of power and wealth and power. But why we should therefore cast off the name and title of Christians, although the general opinion and resolution be so violent for it, I confess I cannot, with submission, apprehend, nor is the consequence necessary. However, since the undertakers propose such wonderful advantages to the nation by this project, and advance many plausible objections against the system of Christianity, I shall briefly consider the strength of both, fairly allow them their greatest weight, and offer such answers as I think most reasonable. After which I will beg leave to show what inconveniences may possibly happen by such an invitation in the present posture of our affairs. First, one great advantage proposed by the abolishing of Christianity is, that it would very much enlarge and establish liberty of conscience, that great bulwark of our nation and of the Protestant religion, which is still too much limited by priestcraft, notwithstanding all the good intentions of the legislature, as we have lately found by a severe instance. For it is confidently reported that two young gentlemen of real hopes, bright wit, and profound judgment, who, upon a thorough examination of causes and effects, and by the mere force of natural abilities, without the least tincture of learning, having made a discovery that there was no God, and generously communicating their thoughts for the good of the public, were some time ago, by an unparalleled severity, and upon I know not what obsolete law, broke for blasphemy. And as it has been widely observed, if prosecution once begins, no man alive knows how far it may reach or where it will end. In answer to all which, with deference to wiser judgments, I think this rather shows the necessity of a nominal religion among us. Great wits love to be free with the highest objects, and if they cannot be allowed a God to revile or renounce, They will speak evil of dignities, abuse the government, and reflect upon the ministry, which I am sure few will deny to be of much more pernicious consequence. According to the saying of Tiberius, Defram offessa die curae, which means offenses against the gods are the gods' business, not ours. As to the particular fact related, I think it is not fair to argue from one instance, perhaps another cannot be produced. To the comfort of all those who may be apprehensive of persecution, blasphemy, we know, is freely spoken a million of times in every coffee house and tavern, and or wherever else good company meet. It must be allowed that, indeed, that to break an English free-born officer only for blasphemy was, to speak the gentlest of such an action, a very high strain of absolute power. Little can be said in excuse for the general. Perhaps he was afraid it might give offence to the allies, among whom, for aught we know, it may be the custom of the country to believe a God. But if he argued, as some have done, upon a mistaken principle, that an officer who is guilty of speaking blasphemy may some time or other proceed so far as to raise a mutiny, the consequence is by no means to be admitted. For surely the commander of an English army is likely to be but ill obeyed, whose soldiers fear and reverence him as little as they do a deity. It is further objected against the gospel system that it obliges men to the belief of things too difficult for free thinkers and such who have shaken off the prejudices that usually cling to a confined education. To which I answer that men should be cautious how they raise objections which reflect upon the wisdom of the nation. Is not everybody freely allowed to believe whatever he pleases, and to publish his belief in the world whether he thinks fit, whenever he thinks fit, especially if it serves to strengthen the party which is in the right? Would any indifferent foreigner who should read the trumpetry lately written by Abigail, Tyndall, Toland, Coward, and 40 more? And there's a note here. John Askill, 1659 to 1738, was an eccentric Irish writer and pamphleteer. God, I wish I could be a pamphleteer. Who argued that death was not obligatory upon Christians. Matthew Tyndale, 1657 to 1733, was a deist who argued that the essential part of Christianity was in ethics rather than any supernatural revelations. So, completely standard argument nowadays. You can all thank Matthew Tyndale when you hear that argument. John Toland, 1670 to 1722, was a deist and writer of Christianity Not Mysterious. Okay. William Coward was born probably in 1657 and died in 1725. Well, he wrote Second Thoughts Concerning the Human Soul, in which he argued that there is no such thing as a separate soul, in case you were curious. Let's read that sentence again. Would any indifferent foreigner who should read the trumpetry lately written by Asgill, Tyndall, Toland, Coward, and 40 more, imagine the gospel to be our rule of faith and confirmed by parliaments? Does any man believe, or say he believes, or desire to have a thought that he says he believes, One syllable of the matter? Is any man worse received upon that score, or does he find his want of nominal faith a disadvantage to him in the pursuit of any civil or military employment? What if there be an old dormant statue or two against him? Statute or two against him? Are they not now obsolete to a degree that Epsom and Dudley themselves? Well, here's a note on that. Sir Richard Epsom, from we don't know to 1510, and Edmund Dudley, uh, circa 1463 to 1510, were two ministers of Henry VII who were convicted of treason and executed immediately following Henry VIII's ascension to the throne. In case you were curious, let's read that again. What if there what if there be an old dormant statute or two against him? Are they not now obsolete to a degree that Epsom and Dudley themselves, if they were now alive, would find it impossible to put them in execution? Is it is likewise urged that there are, by computation, in the kingdom above 10,000 parsons, whose revenues, added to those of my lords the bishops, would suffice to maintain at least 200 young gentlemen of wit and pleasure, and free-thinking enemies to priestcraft, narrow principles, pedantry, and prejudices, who might be an ornament to the court and town, and then again so great a number of able-bodied divines might be a recruit to our fleet and armies. This indeed appears to be the consideration of some weight. But then, on the other side, several things deserve to be considered likewise. At first, whether it may not be thought necessary that in certain tracts of country, like what we call parishes, there shall be one man at least of ability to read and write. Then it seems a wrong computation that the revenues of the church throughout this island would be large enough to maintain 200 young gentlemen, or even half that number, after the present refined way of living, that is, to allow each of them such a rent as, in the modern form of speech, would make them easy. But still there is in the project a greater mischief behind, and we ought to beware of the woman's folly, who killed the hen that every morning laid her a golden egg. For pray, what would become of the race of men in the next age if we had nothing to trust to besides the scrofulous, consumptive productions furnished by our men of wit and pleasure, when having squandered away their vigor, health, and estates, they are forced by some disagreeable marriage to piece up their broken fortunes and entail rottenness and politeness on their posterity. Now here are 10,000 persons reduced, by the wise regulations of Henry VIII, the necessity of a low diet and moderate exercise, who are the only great restorers of our breed, without which the nation would in an age or two become one great hospital. Did that happen? Only, I don't know, I've never been to England. Another advantage proposed by the abolishing of Christianity is the clear gain of 1 day in 7, which is now entirely lost, and consequently kingdom 1/7 less considerable in trade, business, and pleasure, besides the loss to the public of so many stately structures, now in the hands of the clergy, which might be converted into playhouses, market-houses, exchanges, common dormitories, and other public edifices. I hope I shall be forgiven a hard word, if I call this a perfect cavil. I readily own there has been an old custom, time out of mind, for people to assemble in the church every Sunday, and that shop yeah, you think? And that shops are still frequently shut, in order, as it is conceived, to preserve the memory of that ancient practice. But how this can prove a hindrance to business or pleasure is hard to imagine. What if the men of pleasure are forced, one day of the week, to game at home instead of the chocolate houses? Are not the taverns and coffee houses open? Can there be a more convenient season for taking a dose of psychic? Are fewer claps got upon Sundays than other days? Is not the chief day for traders to sum up the accounts of the week, and for lawyers to prepare their briefs? But I would fain know how it can be pretended that the churches are misapplied, where are more appointments and rendezvous of gallantry, where more care to appear in the foremost box, with greater advantage of dress, where more meetings for business, where more bargains driven of all sorts, and where so many conveniences or incitements to sleep. There is one advantage greater than any of the foregoing proposed by the abolishing of Christianity, that it will utterly extinguish parties among us, by removing those factious distinctions of high and low church, of Whig and Tory, Presbyterian and Church of England, which are now so many grievous clogs upon public proceedings, and are apt to dispose men to prefer the gratifying of themselves or depressing of their adversaries before the most important interests of the state. That's an interesting way to think of political parties. Prefer the gratifying of themselves or depressing of their adversaries. That's pretty funny. I confess, if it were certain that so great an advantage would redound to the nation by this expedient, I would submit and be silent. But will any man say that, if the words whoring, drinking, cheating, lying, stealing were, by act of Parliament, ejected out of the English tongue and dictionaries, we should all awake next morning chaste and temperate, honest and just, and lovers of truth? Is this a fair consequence? Or if the physicians would forbid us to pronounce the words pox, gout, rheumatism, and stone, would that expedient serve, like so many talisman, to destroy the diseases themselves? Are party and faction, rooted in men's hearts, no deeper than phrases borrowed from religion, or founded upon no firmer principles? And is our language so poor that we cannot find other terms to express them? Are envy, pride, avarice, and ambitions such ill nomenclatures that they cannot furnish appellations for their owners? Will not heydukes and mamelukes and mandarins and patshaws, or any other words formed at pleasure, serve to distinguish those who are in the ministry from others who would be in it if they could? What, for instance, is easier than to vary the form of speech, and instead of the word church make it a question in politics whether the monument be in danger? Because religion was nearest at hand to furnish a few convenient phrases, is our invention so barren we can find no other? Suppose, for argument's sake, that the Tories favored Margarita, the Whigs Mrs. Toft, and the Trimmers Valentini. And there's a note from Margarita to Valentini: Francesca Margareta de la Pine, born unknown and died in 1746, was a celebrated singer of the period, while Catherine Tofts, circa 1680 to circa 1758, was a vocalist whose professional rivalry with Epine was celebrated in contemporary verse. And Valentini was a celebrated male soprano performing in London, circa 1707 to 1715. So they were singers. Suppose, for argument's sake, that the Tories favored Margarita and Whigs Mrs. Toft and the Trimmers Valentini. Would not Margaritians, Toftians, and Valentinians be very tolerable marks of distinction? The Prasini and the Ventini, two most virulent factions in Italy, began, if I remember right, by a distinction of colors and ribbons, and we might contend with as good a grace about the dignity of the blue and the green, which would serve as properly to divide the court, the parliament, and the kingdom between them as any terms of art whatsoever borrowed from religion. And therefore I think there is little force in this objection against Christianity, or prospect of so great an advantage as is proposed in the abolishing of it. It is again objected as a very absurd, ridiculous custom that a set of men should be suffered, much less employed and hired, to bawl one day in seven against the lawfulness of those methods most in use towards the pursuit of greatness, riches, and pleasure, which are in the constant practice of all men alive on the other six. But this objection is, I think, a little unworthy of so refined an age as ours. Let us argue this matter calmly. I appeal to the breast of any polite free thinker, whether in the pursuit of gratifying a predominant passion he has not always felt a wonderful incitement by reflecting it was a thing forbidden, and therefore we see, in order to cultivate this taste, the wisdom of the nation has taken special care that the ladies should be furnished with prohibited silks, and the men with prohibited wine. And indeed it were to be wished that some other prohibitions were promoted in order to improve the pleasures of the town, which for want of such expedients began already, as I am told, to flag and grow languid, giving way daily to cruel inroads from the spleen. It is likewise proposed as a great advantage to the public, that if we once discard the system of the gospel, all religion will of course be banished for ever, and consequently along in those grievous prejudices of education, which under the name of virtue, conscience, honour, justice, and the like, are so apt to disturb the peace of human minds, and the notion whereof are so hard to be eradicated by right reason or free thinking, sometimes during the whole course of our lives. Here first I observe how difficult it is to get rid of a phrase which the world is once grown fond of, though the occasion that first produced it be entirely taken away. For several years past, if a man had but an ill-favoured nose, the deep thinkers of the age would some way or other contrive to impute the cause of the prejudice of his education. From this fountain were said to be derived all our foolish notions of justice, piety, love of our country, all our opinions of God or a future state, heaven, hell, and the like, and there might formerly perhaps have been some pretence for this charge, but so effectual care has been taken to remove those prejudices by an entire change in the methods of education, that, with honour I mention to our polite innovators, the young gentlemen who are now on the scene seem to have not the least tincture of those infusions, or string of those weeds, and by consequence the reason for abolishing nominal Christianity upon this pretext is wholly ceased. For the rest, it may perhaps admit a controversy whether the banishing of all notions of religion whatsoever would be convenient for the vulgar. Not that I am in the least of opinion with those who hold religion to have been the invention of politicians to keep the lower part of the world in awe, by the fear of invisible powers, unless mankind were then very different to what it is now. For I look upon the mass or body of our people here in England to be as free thinkers, that is to say, as stanch unbelievers, as any of the highest rank. But I conceive some scattered notion about a superior power to be of singular use for the common people, as furnishing excellent materials to keep children quiet when they grow peevish, providing topics of amusement in a tedious winter night. Lastly, it is proposed as a singular advantage that the abolishing of Christianity will very much contribute to the uniting of Protestants, by enlarging the terms of communion, so as to take in all sorts of dissenters, who are now shut out of the pale upon account of a few ceremonies, which all sides confess to be things indifferent. That this alone will effectually answer the great ends of a scheme for comprehension, by opening a large noble gate at which all bodies may enter, whereas the chauffeuring with dissenters, and dodging about this or the other ceremony, is but like opening a few wickets and leaving them ajar, by which no more than one can get in at a time, and that not without stooping and sidling and squeezing his body. To all this I answer, that there is one darling inclination of mankind which usually affects to be a retainer to religion, though she be neither its parent, its godmother, or its friend. I mean the spirit of opposition, that lived long before Christianity, and can easily subsist without it. Let us for instance examine wherein the opposition of sectaries among us consists. We shall find Christianity to have no share in it at all. Does the gospel anywhere prescribe a starched, squeezed countenance, a stiff, formal gait, a singularity of manners and habit, or any affected modes of speech, different from the reasonable part of mankind? Yet if Christianity did not lend its name to stand in the gap, and to employ or divert these humours, they must of necessity be spent in contrivations to the laws of the land, and disturbance of the public peace. There is a portion of enthusiasm assigned to every nation, which, if it has not proper objects to work on, will burst out and set all in a flame. If the quiet of a state can be bought by only flinging men a few ceremonies to devour, it is a purchase no wise man would refuse. Let the mastiffs amuse themselves about a sheep's skin stuffed with hay, provided it will keep them from worrying the flock. The institution of convents abroad seems in one point a strain of great wisdom, there being fewer regularities in human passions that may not have recourse to vent themselves in some of those orders which are so many retreats for the speculative, the melancholy, the proud, the silent, the politic, and the morose, to spend themselves, and evaporate the noxious particles for each of whom we in this island are forced to provide a several sects of religion to keep them quiet, and whenever Christianity shall be abolished, the legislature must find some other expedient to employ and entertain them. For what imports for what imports it how large a gate you open, if there will be always left a number who place a pride and a merit in refusing to enter? I can't be certain, but is this guy saying Christianity bad? Um, I think to some degree, yes. I think it's basically just saying that Christianity is not even really Christianity, and that it's just kind of already a secular. It's already a secularized like structure in society, and that it's serving more purposes than are usually acknowledged Christianity to serve. Although I could be completely misinterpreting this because it was written in 17 something, 1708. So it's probably a reference to some very particular stuff, a very particular Enlightenment era philosophies or politics that I just don't know about. Uh, I don't think it's necessarily just Christianity bad. Having thus considered the most important objections against Christianity and the chief advantages proposed by the abolishing thereof, I shall now, with equal deference and submission to wiser judgments, as before, proceed to mention a few inconveniences that may happen if the gospel should be repealed, which perhaps the projectors may not have sufficiently considered. I don't know if people at the is the joke that nobody at this time was objecting Christianity, or because I think that's where the joke lies. Like, if people were, then my interpretation, if everybody was saying this, and it was actually becoming a popular worldview, then the joke probably lies. Well, this whole thing has been Christianity good section, really, because, like, the whole thing is written up as an argument that Christianity is good. That's the name of it. It's sort of like a modest proposal where it's not at all, it's a completely immodest proposal, which was the first one I read about eating kids. Um, I'm not sure how much he's just doing I'm just going to write something that I believe the exact opposite of. It just depends too much on the context for me to say whatever the point is, kinda. Gonna have to look more into it to see if it's to see how much he actually likes or dislikes Christianity. Anyway, a few of those ill considered consequences that he mentioned. At first I am very sensible how much the gentlemen of wit and pleasure are apt to murmur and be choked at the sight of so many daggle-tailed parsons, who happen to fall in their way and offend their eyes. But at the same time, those wise reformers do not consider what an advantage and felicity it is for great wits to be always provided with objects of scorn and contempt, in order to exercise and improve their talents, and divert their spleen from falling on each other or on themselves, especially when all this may be done without the least imaginable danger to their persons. And to urge another argument of a parallel nature, if Christianity were once abolished, how could the free thinkers, the strong reasoners, and the men of profound learning be able to find another subject so calculated in all points whereon to display their abilities? What wonderful productions of wit should we be deprived of from those whose genius, by continual practice, has been wholly turned upon raillery and invectives against religion, and would therefore never be able to shine or distinguish themselves upon any other subject? Are we daily complaining of the great decline of wit? We are daily complaining about the great decline of wit among us, and who would we take away the greatest, perhaps the only topic we have left? Who would ever have suggested Asgil for a wit, or Toland for a philosopher, if the inexhaustible stock of Christianity had not been at hand to provide them with materials? What other subject, through all art or nature, could have produced Tyndale for a profound author, or furnished him with readers? It is the wise choice of the subject that alone adorns and distinguishes the writer. For had 100 such pens as these been employed on the side of religion, they would have immediately sunk into silence and oblivion. Nor do I think it wholly groundless, or my fears altogether imaginary, that the abolishing of Christianity may perhaps bring the Church into danger, or at least put the Senate to the trouble of another securing vote. I desire I may not be mistaken. I am far from presuming to affirm or think that the Church is in danger at present, or as things now stand, but we know not how soon it may be so when the Christian religion is repealed. As plausible as this project seems, there may be a dangerous design lurking under it. Nothing can be more notorious than that the atheists, deists, Sonicians, anti-Trinitarians, and other subdivisions of free thinkers are persons of little zeal for the present ecclesiastical establishment. Their declared opinion is for repealing the sacramental test. They are very indifferent with regard to ceremonies, nor do they hold the jus divinium, which means divine law, of episcopacy. Therefore, this may be intended as one politic step towards altering the constitution of the church established, and setting up presbytery to the stead, which I leave to be further considered by those at the helm. In the last place, I think nothing can be more plain than that by this expedient we shall run into the evil we chiefly pretend to avoid, and that the abolishment of the Christian religion will be the readiest course we can take to introduce popery. And I am more inclined to this opinion because we know it has been the constant practice of the Jesuits to send over emissaries with instructions to personate themselves members of the several prevailing sects among us. So it is recorded that they have sundry times appeared in the disguise of Presbyterians, Anabaptists, Independents, and Quakers, according as any of these were most in credit. So, since the fashion has been taken up of exploding religion, the popish missionaries have not been wanting to mix with the free thinkers, among whom Toland, the great oracle of the anti-Christians, is an Irish priest, the son of an Irish priest, and the most learned and ingenious author of a book called The Rights of the Christian Church, was in a proper juncture reconciled to the Romish faith, whose true son, as appears by 100 passages in his treatise, he still continues. Perhaps I could add some others to the number, but the fact is beyond dispute, and the reasoning they proceed by is right. For supposing Christianity to be extinguished, the people will never be at ease till they find out some other method of worship, which will as infallibly produce superstition as superstition will end in popery. And therefore, if, notwithstanding all I have said, it still be thought necessary to have a bill brought in for repealing Christianity, I humbly offer an amendment that instead of the word Christianity may be put religion in general, which I conceive will better answer all the good ends proposed by the projectors for it. For as long as we leave in being a God and his providence, with all the necessary consequences which curious and inquisitive men will be apt to draw from such premises, we do not strike at the root of the evil, though we should ever so effectually annihilate the present scheme of the gospel. For of what use is freedom of thought, if it will not produce freedom of action, which is the sole end, how remote soever in appearance, of all objections against Christianity, and therefore the freethinkers consider it as a sort of edifice, wherein all the parts have such a mutual dependence on each other, that if you happen to pull out one single nail, the whole fabric must fall to the ground. This was happily expressed by him who had heard of a text brought for proof of the Trinity, which in an ancient manuscript was differently read. He thereupon immediately took the hint, and by a sudden deduction of a long sorties, must logically concluded, why, if it be as you say, I may surely whore and drink on and defy the parson. For which, and many the like instances easy to be produced, I think nothing can be more manifest than that the quarrel is not against any particular points of hard digestion in the Christian system, but against religion in general, which, by laying restraints on human nature, is supposed the great enemy to the freedom of thought and action. Upon the whole, if it shall be thought for the benefit of church and state that Christianity be abolished, I conceive, however, it may be more convenient to defer the execution to a time of peace, and not venture, in this conjuncture, to disobligate our enemies, who, as it falls out, are all Christians, and many of them, by the prejudices of their education, so bigoted as to place a sort of pride in the appellation. If upon being rejected by them we are to trust to an alliance with the Turk, we shall find ourselves much deceived, for he for as he is too remote, and generally engaged in war with the Persian emperor, so his people would be more scandalized at our infidelity than our Christian neighbors. For the Turks are not only strict observers of religious worship, but, what is worse, believe a God, which is more than is required of us, even while we preserve the name of Christians. To conclude, whatever some may think of the great advantages to trade by this favorite scheme, I do very much apprehend that, in 6 months' time after the act is passed for the extirpation of the gospel, the Bank and East India stock may fall at least 1%, and since that is 50 times more than ever the wisdom of our age thought fit to venture for the preservation of Christianity, there is no reason we should at so great a loss merely for the sake of destroying it. You should be at so great a loss merely for the sake of destroying it. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how he feels about that one. Let's look it up, shall we? Slumberous. That's a good word. Slumberous. That's what I'm thinking right now. Um, John Swift in defense of Christianity or something like that. Abolishing Christianity. Check out the Wikipedia articles. An argument against abolishing Christianity is a satirical essay by Jonathan Swift defending Christianity, and in particular Anglicanism against contemporary assaults by its various opponents, including freethinkers, deists, anti-Trustarians, atheists, and Sanitians. Non-Trustarian. Okay. The essay is known for its sophisticated, multi-layered irony and is regarded as a prime example of political satire. Yeah, it was so multi-layered, I can't even understand what side it's on. I'd have to read it again, maybe 3 times. In the essay, Swift answers several real and rhetorical arguments against Christianity. First, he responds to the argument that the abolition of Christianity would expend the liberty of conscience by arguing that if great wits could not denounce the Church, they might instead turn to the denunciation of the government causing political unrest. I remember that. That was funny. Swift then addresses the argument that the Church, then supported by government funds, was a drain on resources that might be better spent elsewhere. Swift responds that if the funds used to support the clergy were used instead to fund free-thinking young gentlemen, the money would in short time be squandered away on vices and divided by disagreeable marriages. Next, Swift counters the argument that the abolition of Christianity would open up another day of the week, the Sabbath, to commercial activities for the benefit of the nation by arguing that the Sabbath provides benefits by allowing lawyers to write their briefs, merchants to tally their books, and others to exercise, go to coffee houses, and counters the argument and otherwise enjoy themselves, ironically implying that the argument is specious because the Sabbath was not kept as intended in any case. That's true. Um, Swift then counters that the argument that abolishing Christianity would remove arbitrary sectarian dissension between Whig, Tory, High Church, and Low Church, etc., that arguably damages civil discourse and politics, by arguing that Christianity merely stands in as a convenient and arbitrary source of such distinctions, and that abolishing it would only allow other equally arbitrary distinctions, essentially arguing that the problem is merely semantic and that such distinctions are a part of human nature, which I agree with. And this is such a short thing. Let's see. I mean, it's giving a good overview in simpler language. So I might as well just read the whole dang thing. That's what I do here. I read. The irony becomes more explicit as Swift next addresses the argument that it is ridiculous to employ a class of people to wail on one day a week against behavior that is the constant practice of all men alive on the other 6 by arguing that such vices, including wine and fine silks, were made all the more pleasurable by virtue of their being forbidden by the Christian mores of the era. In response to the fastidious rhetorical arguments that the abolition of Christianity would lead to the abolition of all religion, and with it such grievous prejudices of education as virtue, honor, conscience, and justice, Swift argues that such conceptions had already been banished from contemporary education, and that this argument was therefore moot. Answering the argument that the abolition of the gospel would benefit the vulgar, and that religion was put in force to keep the lower part of the world in awe by fear of invisible powers. Swift points out that the vast majority of people were already unbelievers who employed religion to quiet peevish children and provide topics for amusing discussion. Swift addresses the argument that abolishing Christianity will contribute to the uniting of a people divided by various sects of by arguing that humanity has an inborn spirit of opposition, such that if Christianity were not extant to provide a context for such natural oppositions among men, this natural tendency would instead be spent in contravention of the law and disturbances of the public peace. And finally, Swift points out potential negative consequences to the abolition of Christianity. First, Swift points out that the reformers do not appreciate the advantage of to them of having such an easy target upon which to practice their criticism and wit with such little risk to their persons in response as the church and clergy, and rhetorically asks what institution could adequately replace the religion in this role. Next, Swift warns that the abolition of Christianity, specifically the Anglican Church, would lead to the rise in Presbyterianism, or worse in his mind, Catholicism. Swift's ironic defense of Christianity becomes more earnest and apparent as he finally proposes that if Christianity were to be abolished, all religion should be banned, so as to fully free men from all bounds of their thinking and behavior, in order that they may be allowed to freely engage in such vices as prostitution and drunkenness. In conclusion, Swift proposes that if Christianity is to be abolished, it ought not to be done until the conclusion of wars in which England was then involved, as many of the country's allies were devoutly Christian, or at least in the case of Turkey, religious. In a final ironic flourish, Swift warns that if Christianity were abolished, the stock market would fall, costing Great Britain more than the country had ever spent for Christianity's preservation, and that there would be no reason to lose that much money for the sake of destroying the faith. So, to recap, it doesn't say much about his. Hey, I'm very tired. You can tell by my spelling. John Swift and arguments against the abolishing Christianity. So, from reading that, my understanding of it seems to be that it was not Christian. What are you doing? It's very late, Dangles. Um, I'm trying to figure out if Jonathan Swift's An Argument Against Abolishing Christianity in England is pro or anti-Christian. Um, and I think on a whole, it's anti-Christian, his genuine opinion of it. I mean, obviously, the whole thing is written from the perspective of pro-Christian. I think it's anti-Christian, but also anti-Christian. It seems to me kind of be like taking a step outside, taking a step away from the argument and just saying all these arguments are stupid, basically, which is everybody's favorite uh, form of argumentation. Um, he does make he makes the free thinkers, the anti-Christians, out to be somewhat ridiculous, but he also makes the church out to be somewhat ridiculous. And I think it's basically just him stepping away from the whole thing and saying this is a stupid argument. Uh, This seems like an interesting article. Ugh. Ah, let's see what this person on literature.stackexchange.com answers. What historical event slash injunction does Swift allude to in this paragraph? I am very sensible what a weakness and presumption it is to reason against the general humor and disposition of the world. I remember it was with great justice and a due regard to the freedom, both to the public and to the press, forbidden upon several penalties to write or discourse or lay wages against thee, even before it was confirmed by Parliament, because it was looked upon as a design to oppose the current of the people, which, besides the folly of it, is a manifest breach of the fundamental law, makes this majority of opinion the voice of God. In manner, and for the very same reasons, it may perhaps be neither safe nor prudent to argue against the abolishing of Christianity at a juncture when all parties seem so unanimously determined upon the point, as we cannot but allow from their actions, their discourses, and their writings. This person says, now this is just Clara Diaz Sanchez. This is just their answer. An argument against abolishing Christianity was published in 1708, and so Swift must have been referring to events at the beginning of the 18th century. The exact event he had in mind is curiously alluded in this text source quoted in question, but is present in other sources, such as here. Here it is. Apparently, the text of an argument against abolishing Christianity. Uh, is there any way scrolling through this? Home, the text. This is literally just the text of it. Or here. Okay, this is actually something different. This is writing on the church. The religious thought of the 18th century does not seem to be as the Catholic Church controlled the people in the good old days. Well, not in England. Um, I remember it was with great injustice and a due regard to the freedom both of the public and the press, forbidden upon several penalties to write or discourse or lay wagers against the Union, even before it was confirmed by Parliament. The Union here refers to the Acts of the Union passed by the English and Scotch Parliaments in 1707, which led to the creation of Great Britain. Remember it was with great justice and due regard to the freedom both of the public and the press, forbidden upon several penalties to write or discourse or lay wagers against the Union, even before it was confirmed by Parliament. The text claims that before the Union was passed, it was illegal to write, discourse, or lay wagers against it. This seems surprising at first, as the law used at that time to censor writings, the Licensing Act. This is specifically about what somebody wrote up text, somebody translated it into modern day English. Crazy book title right here for the for that text we just read. This does not fit the text at all, not even slightly. Um, it's too late in the night for me to be on this much of a rabbit hole trying to figure out, really think about this text. Uh, Critical. Um, changed it. Um, my oh my. There's not a chance I'm reading this right now. Ironic and satiric are the terms most often used to describe the stance that Swift adopts towards his assertions in many of his writings. Playing the text. The intent of this writing in particular, argument against abolishing Christianity, his intent to me seems foggy. That's what I'm looking for. Identifying the victim of Swift's satire, understanding the nature of Swift's fictional stance, extrapolating from that fictional stance to Swift's genuine position have been the goals of critics in numerous examinations of an argument against abolishing Christianity. Most critics begin in agreement, including Rosenheim. Swift's argument is commonly agreed it is commonly agreed is satiric throughout, and Noakes judges it to be, by common consent, one of the showpieces of his irony. Most critics also seem willing to identify the defender of nominal Christianity as the target of satiric attack. Defender of nominal Christianity. So, someone who argues that Christianity is a good thing to keep around for moral reasons is the one who's being made fun of, according to Noakes here. The victim can only be the nominal Christian himself, the lip service church member. As for Swift's attitude towards nominal Christianity, there is general agreement that in the argument he treats it satirically. He definitely seems to treat it satirically. Christians also willingly equate the nominal Christianity defended in the pamphlet with hypocrisy. The second of the two forms of Christianity identified by Swift in the argument, the nominal, is modern hypocrisy, preserving the name of Christianity without either the faith or the charity. The irony of the argument is at the expense of the hypocritical nominal Christianity. It clearly satirizes those who practice Christian hypocrisy. They part company, however, over just what it means to say that Swift adopts an ironic stance towards the nominal Christianity which his pamphlet purports to defend. Well, I think that it definitely can't be defending Christianity for realsies. It's definitely not that. Who it's making fun of could be the Christian. It also seemed to me, and I'm no expert, but it seemed to me like it was making fun of the atheists too. Like specifically in the part where it's, oh, they won't have anything better to talk about. They're so focused on hating this one thing, they'll never, they're not smart enough to come up with anything more to argue over. This is actually an interesting thing. I'd like to read more of. My problem is that it's 1 in the morning for me. um, According to Richardson, Swift holds up the ideal of real Christianity as a measure of society that is absolutely necessary, also with always with the awareness that the ideals are unreasonable because of the fallen condition of humanity. Finally, Richardson stresses that the rebuke to the reader in the argument is carried out in a friendly, confident tone. Though Richardson's reading is extreme, it nevertheless exemplifies the conclusions of critics who interpret Swift's irony as meaning the opposite of what he says. According to these critics, instead of defending nominal Christianity, Swift must be attacking democracy and defending real Christianity. I mean, yeah, I think that's probably, but he can't always mean the opposite of what he says, can he? So, taking for an example, oh, well, atheists won't have anything better to argue over. They mean the opposite of that. And I guess he does like these people, and he was just talking trash about them. Joke, I guess. I don't know. I think that's not a bad place to stop. If anyone in the comments has an idea of who is being made fun of in an argument against the abolishment of Christianity, I feel like he used the term abolish Christianity so often throughout the pamphlet, it must be anti Christianity. Yeah, but he used the word modest to describe a modest proposal quite a few times, and it was anything but. It seems like his idea of satire, or the idea of satire at the time, is just literally say the opposite of what you mean, or but not really that simple though, because it's not just eating babies is wrong. It's the idea that dehumanizing people to the point of just eating children. Um, I don't think it's quite as simple as that last argument on that critical source, which I didn't even name the title of because I'm an idiot. Don't forget to like and subscribe, YouTube, says Slimy Ducks. Now, I would never say that, but Slimy Ducks is saying that. Don't forget to like and subscribe, YouTube. And if there's anyone in the comments who would like to add to the discussion of who was being made fun of in an argument against the abolishment of Christianity, feel free to comment and we can discuss this further in the comment section. You should go on YouTube. You're talking to all the people on Twitch right now. Well, all the people on YouTube, you should go on Twitch, as I do stream live. At a very jumbled up and mixed up schedule. I mean, who would ever guess that I would start streaming at 11 o'clock at night for no reason and just Jonathan Swift? Nobody. So if you're lucky enough to catch my streams, we can talk about stuff. But I'll also talk to anybody in the YouTube comments because I'm such a cool YouTuber. I am on YouTube, Dr. Dangles, at Cold Stone Readery. I'm Cold Stone, and this is the Readery. But I'm too tired now to keep talking, so I'm gonna go to sleep now. Did the stream end?